Hello, and welcome to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting the right way, with God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. As always, I am your host, Michael Melito. First and foremost, I am a servant of God and a follower of Jesus Christ. I've been blessed to do many other things by God's grace. Marine Corps combat veteran, been to war a couple of times. Also served in another branch of the armed forces, also veteran law enforcement, LAPD, worked regular assignments, more specialized assignments. Been blessed to win more shooting competitions than I can remember. Private contractor for a 3-letter government agency. Also been blessed to be the commander of a tactical team to stop active shooters. And many other things, but an abbreviated bio today. I'm trying to get this episode out. This is the 303 British remix because I lost the first one going across the country somehow. Blew out the window, and I'm just kidding it. The audio quality on the first one was subpar. Something was going on with the mic in the Mobile Studio 2.0, and it just was horrible. So, rather than put it out and it be subpar, I would rather re-record it. So that's what I'm doing now. This is the remix of the 303 British. What a storied cartridge. What a cool cartridge. What a classic cartridge. It is not the Methuselah of military cartridges, but it's, I think, the Jared. So I believe Jared is the second oldest living person that lived the longest in the Bible. I think that was Jared. I think the longest serving and still currently serving military round would probably have to go to the 7.62x54R rimmed cartridge the Russians used and have used for so long. But the 303 British came about in the 1800s, I believe the 1880s. And the first time I looked all this up, this next time I'm going to do it from memory. So if memory serves correct with that caveat, I believe 1888, 1889 it came out. This cartridge, the 303 British, was originally black powder, if you can believe that. And it served well up into after World War II. Originally a black powder cartridge, loaded with black powder, atop, I believe, if I remember correctly, a 220 grain non-Spitzer bullet. So it went from black powder to smokeless, and that whole cordite thing, if you know what cordite is, it's a long kind of angel hair spaghetti looking very primitive form of smokeless powder, but worked quite well for the British for quite a while. To cordite, to what we consider nowadays more modern smokeless powder, to rounded bullets, to Spitzer bullets, even with, I believe the rationale behind it was a lack of availability of aluminum for the tips of the bullets. I believe for a time they were loaded with wood tip bullets. So it's been through all kinds of crazy iterations, and it's a really cool cartridge. I should mention that I am not a sommelier of the 303 British. There are probably people that could do an entire podcast, episode after episode after episode, on the 303 British and all the different Enfield rifles and all manner of things. The Britophiles, the Englishophiles, the Anglophiles. That's actually the right name. An Anglophile is somebody that has an affinity for British things. But there are Anglophiles out there that could talk all about this and the Webley revolvers and probably do like literally an entire podcast. I don't know all the little tiny ins and outs and nuances of the Mark 1 and the Mark 2 and the Mark 3 and the Mark 4. We're going to talk about the 303 British as a cartridge, a little bit about its history and its relevance today. Again, started out with black powder. Very quickly, I believe in the 1890s, went to smokeless powder. And with a smokeless powder and a Spitzer bullet, this thing really came into its own. It's on par with any other big bore, and I say big bore, I guess it's medium bore, but any other of the main battle cartridges of the day. It's on par with the 7.62x54R. It is on par with the 30-06, granted in a little bit of an antiquated design for modern semi-autos. for other things, it's just fine. You got to remember, this was developed in a black powder era when manufacturing wasn't what it is today, and the ability to headspace on a rim and to have a really good beefy extractor and a really good beefy rim in really adverse conditions was advantageous. So things that we might think of as antiquated today absolutely had a purpose at the time. But the 303 British is absolutely a decent round today. It's a full-powered rifle round, far more powerful any way you slice that cake than the 223 is. I didn't say more effective, I didn't say a better battlefield cartridge, I said it's more powerful. Now, I'll give credit where credit is due. Some of the knowledge I have I've just acquired over the years, and I honestly don't remember. Some is from the Cartridges of the World book that one of the patrons gave me. This load data that I'm going to quote now is going to be from Wikipedia. So let's give that the credit where credit is due. And talking about modern loadings, how powerful is this round? Okay, and we're going to use general round numbers for the other cartridges, but you know, that classic 30 caliber cartridge, in general, you're talking the 150 grain bullet. Now, don't nitpick, maybe 147, maybe 155 or something, but right around 150 grains is a pretty standard loading for the 30 caliber cartridges of the day, the 30-06, the 303, and things like that, right? So if you're looking at that, you're looking at a 150 grain bullet at 2,770 feet per second. You're looking at a 174 grain bullet at 2,500 and 180 at 2,570. So the classic 150s at 2,770, that's nothing to sneeze at. You think a good round number I try to remember for the 30-06 or the 308 is generally 150 grain at 2,800. And I know you can get some hotter loads. I'm talking about classic, good old round number and military loads, right? So it's on par with that. The difference is not enough difference to make a difference, as Paul Harrell often says, and I like that quote. It's not enough difference to make a difference. The difference is purely academic for the things the 303 British was designed for and is commonly used for, right? I don't think anybody is shooting 1,000-yard competitions with the 303 British. Could be wrong about that, but for what it's designed for, it's on par with the 30-06 and the 308. So think about all the things the 30-06 and 308 are great for, because those are primarily American cartridges. We think of those a lot more here in America. They're great for pretty much any medium to large game in North America, right? The 30-06 is known for its versatility and its effectiveness on game, just period, right? It has been known for a long time for its good terminal performance. So the 303 Brit can certainly do all that stuff. Especially it mentions 180 grain load. That will be a fine big game load. And I should mention that we think of the 30-06 a lot more here in America, and we kind of a lot of times become America-centric, egocentric here as Americans, that everything. But I know from looking at demographics of the podcast that by God's grace, there are a lot of listeners from other countries, you know, and a big chunk of the world was part of the British Empire at one time or another. The 303 Brits have been for a long time. I don't think anybody can argue. They've been a dying empire. They have been a very rapidly declining empire. There was a time when people said the sun never set on the British Empire. Now it's mostly a small island nation in Europe. But there was a time when, from the jungles of India to the mountains of Nepal to the Middle East and Africa, the British Empire was there, and where it was, it took the 303 British, and it served well in all those environments. So although the 30-06 is far more common here in America, you may be more likely to find a 303 British in, let's say, Canada, part of the British Empire, or or Australia, or African countries, or Middle Eastern countries, or we talked about India, right? We're not the only country that owns guns and hunts. I know that a lot of times we think that we are, but we're not. A lot of other countries hunt. Australians hunt. You know, African countries have a lot of really cool game that would be awesome to hunt here in America. So, in those places, the 303 Brit probably does a lot of the same things that we do here with the 30-06 and 308. So it is certainly a capable cartridge. It is certainly battle proven. Let's talk about some of the unique advantages of the 303 British. So we talked about that big rim, and it's a highly tapered cartridge, as a lot of the cartridges of the day were, which helps in like machine gun extracting and things like that. But if you wanted a classic single shot break open or falling block or rolling block, or I think falling block's a better design, so let's say falling block, like you want a classic single shot break open hunting rifle, or maybe a drilling or something like that, and you're going to drop these cartridges in, that highly tapered cartridge and that thick rim, that lends itself very well to that kind of rifle and that kind of hunting. There's a reason the 375 H&H has that very similar design. A lot of taper, a big thick rim. You can drop them in those drillings, those double rifles, those single shot rifles very easily. There's really no advantage to having a more straight walled cartridge and a rimless cartridge if you're shooting it in a single shot. In fact, I'd say those old school tapered and rimmed cartridges have an advantage in that, to drop those in there. And if you were going to hunt, let's say, with a Ruger number 1 Tropical, which if you don't know is a very beautiful wood and steel elegant single shot rifle, if you wanted to go out and hunt with a rifle like that, a 303 British would be a beautiful choice for that. And again, it'll pretty much do anything the 30-06 will do, talking about game hunting. And it's certainly proven as a battlefield cartridge. Again, the British used it from the 1880s, 1890s, all the way up until after World War II, when it got replaced by the 7.62 NATO. And I will say it's an antiquated design if you're going to shoot it out of a semi-automatic. You know, there's a reason that when they started going to the semi-automatics, they went to the 7.62 NATO. But if you're talking about a hunting cartridge or a bolt-action rifle, really, as long as the rims aren't a problem and you stack the ammunition properly, I don't imagine there's going to be much of an issue. I mean, the Lee Enfield rifles are legendary for their ability to shoot quickly compared to most other bolt-action rifles. So the rim obviously wasn't a problem there. We all know about the Mosin Nagant, and although it has its issues, it is certainly capable battlefield rifle that has been used with a different rimmed cartridge for quite a long time. So on a bolt-action rifle, it is obviously proven because it was used a long time. If it had been detrimental, they would have switched away from it. It's great for that. Why else might you want to look at the 303 British? Well, there was a time when it was a lot cheaper to buy especially like in the Cold War era. I guess we're in Cold War 2.0, but the original Cold War era, right? There was a time when you could get a lot of really cheap military surplus rifles, and a lot of those were the Lees in the 303 British, and a lot of people sporterized those. And now some people did a crap job, just horrible, just really ruined those beautiful, elegant guns. Some people did a really fine job of sporterizing those rifles. So you might be able to pick one of those up at a gun show or on the back rack of a gun store that does a lot of used guns for not a lot of money. And it could be that they sporterize that thing, which destroys really the collector value, but it may give it a lot of value to you. It may just be a really beautiful piece of blued steel and walnut, and if they did a good job, let's say bedding the action and free floating and a really good solid scope mount, and they did all that extra work and put a lot of time and effort into handcrafting something great, you might be able to get a really good rifle for not a lot of money. So that's a really good reason that you might want to consider the 303 British. Don't think that for a hunting cartridge it's really inferior to a 30-06. I don't think that it is. So, that 303 British certainly would be considered for that. Also, we talked about the Anglophile. Maybe you just like British stuff, or you like World War II stuff, and you just want to collect Enfields. Enfields are a fine rifle, so you may want to consider the 303 British for that. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not a gun collector. This is not gun collector life. It's gunfighter life. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with doing both. If you have the space and the time and the resources and you want to collect, let's say the World War II battle rifles. There's certainly nothing wrong with that. So for that reason also, you may want to consider the 303 British. It's a good, capable, robust, and powerful 30 caliber cartridge. I should mention that I said 30 caliber. Here in America, we generally default to .308, and not just 308. The caliber, if you don't know, 308 is a bullet diameter. Like your 30-06, your 308, your 30-30, they're going to have .308 diameter bullets. The 303 British does use a .312 bullet, so not exactly the same. They're both 30 caliber, but the 303 British, I should mention that it does use a .3112 diameter bullet. Also, a really cool reason is maybe you want a beefy bolt action rifle. Maybe you think that's a great choice for a hard times tool to be able to hunt and continue to provide, and you want a big, beefy bolt action rifle. Well, a really cool thing about the 303 British is, we talked about it, originally was designed for black powder. So I see no reason why you couldn't, if you had the load data, use a full charge of black powder, assuming it was the right kind of black powder. Black powder is not homogeneous, right? There's 2F and 3F and all kinds of different black powder. So know what you're doing with this. But you could, there's no reason you couldn't, because metallurgy just got better over time, have a good, fast-handling bolt-action rifle and have to load it with black powder if it got to the point where you had to load your ammunition. Now, it's not going to be as potent or as powerful as smokeless powder, but it certainly would be quite potent and quite powerful. So if you got to the point where you had to make your own ammo, you can make your own black powder. Aside from being like a chemist with a laboratory, you're probably not making your own smokeless powder. But a lot of the long hunters back in the day, I heard stories about some of the, I forget if it was Daniel Boone or Davy Crockett, but one of those pioneer type figures going on really long hunts and finding the stuff and making his own powder on the hunt. If that's true, you could certainly do it with some kind of infrastructure, with some kind of base of operations. If things got really bad, you could reload this, battlefield weapon with a decent cartridge with black powder. And I'm not going to get into how to do it. It might run afoul of the ATF, but you can reuse primers and make priming compound. It's not that complicated. You can literally find old batteries and throw them in a fire and melt them down and get lead. So you could theoretically run one of these old sporterized bolt action rifles, reloading it with black powder and ammunition that you could literally remake just by living off the land, as we say, or being like a modern day long hunter pioneer. So you could reload this cartridge with black powder because it was originally designed for black powder, and that's pretty cool. Anyway, some really cool stuff on a really cool cartridge, the 303 British. There's a certain subsection that really like these cartridge talks. A lot of people listen to these on YouTube. Just know that I'm primarily a podcaster. If you like this content, you may like the other content. You could check out both this podcast, Gunfighter Life, and the Alpha Male podcast. And if you care about the important stuff, Simple Man Sermons. You can get them all free on Spotify or iTunes. They're free to listen to. If you want to support the podcast, hopefully you'll consider going to Patreon and becoming a patron. There's a lot of cool insider content there. Thing I'm going to forego, since I did a quick bio and this is a shorter episode, the tactical tip of the day. The tactical verse of the day I will not forego. I see this one is very fitting for me in my life right now, as I have been on the move Oscar Mike for a lot longer than I was planning, but maybe that's where you are in life too. Anyway, the verse. Not that I have already obtained all this, or have already arrived at my goal, but I press on to take hold of that for which Christ Jesus took hold of me. Brothers and sisters, I do not consider myself yet to have taken hold of it, but one thing I do, forgetting what is behind and staring toward what is ahead. Or as I was straining towards what is ahead. But one thing I do, forgetting what is behind and straining towards what is ahead, I press on towards the goal to win the prize for which God has called me, heavenward in Christ Jesus. Keep pushing forward, men. With that, thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.